Welcome to Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions Annual Advocacy Workshop. I'm Scott Peterson, a co-founder, vice chair of the board of directors, and chair of the advocacy committee. Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions unites people of faith to develop moral solutions to the climate crisis. Through our network of over 2,500 supporters, drawn from 80 faith communities in Northern Virginia, we advocate for equitable climate policies that bring real change. Before we begin, a few words about yesterday. For anyone who watched on live TV, the mobs attacked the Capitol in Washington, D.C., those images will live in our memories for years to come. But our nation endured, and so must we. For we have important work to do. We must love our families, love our communities, and recommit ourselves to the important work we're doing to build solutions to the climate crisis through FACS and other groups. We are truly a rainbow of faith traditions that can change our corner of the world. My own spiritual tradition is circuitous. I was baptized a Russian Orthodox in Pennsylvania, raised Lutheran in Arizona, and became a Unitarian Universalist in California. I'd like to open our Advocacy Day kickoff with a short prayer from the Jewish tradition that I hope you find meaningful. And God saw everything he had made and found it very good. And he said, "This is a beautiful world that I have given you. Take care of it. Do not ruin it." It is said, before the world was created, the Holy One kept creating worlds and destroying them. Finally, he created this one and was satisfied. He said to Adam, "This is the last world I shall make. I place it in your hands. Hold it in trust." So in the fall of last year, we released our 2021 advocacy, Fairfax to Zero Advocacy Priorities ebook. This 32-page booklet is our first ever and lays out our top advocacy priorities for the county, our public schools, and the state. You can get your copy by visiting our website, faithforclimate.org, and clicking on the advocacy campaigns. We organize faith-based advocacy teams in Fairfax County, Prince William County, Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria. Consider joining us. Just this week, FACS unveiled our 2021 Fairfax to Zero Social Media Toolkit. The Social Media Toolkit distills information from our more comprehensive report into bite-sized pieces of education and attainable solutions for catalyzing change and influencing policymakers. So here's how you can use it. You can find the digital assets and sample messages we've already created for you. We've focused on 4 priorities initially: pursuing zero waste, increasing the tree canopy, reducing the energy burden, and encouraging electric vehicle adoption. Take a look at the snapshot of our digital assets when you see it. You can download the images and the videos and share on your own social media platforms so that we can all unify and amplify our voices. You'll see us posting on our channels as well. And feel free to retweet and repost, like, and or comment. We wanted to give you the flexibility to post the graphics and the messages based on your own timeline and maybe even in conjunction with your own priorities. You can find the advocacy workbook, the social media toolkit, excuse me, on our website and in our newsletters. As many of you know, the 2021 Virginia General Assembly will convene next Wednesday, July 13th. It'll end only a month later. FACS has identified 5 priority areas, and I'd like to tell you about them very quickly. First is a bill by Delegate Betsy Carr that will prohibit the dispensing by food vendors of takeout prepared food in single-use polystyrene and styrofoam food containers. To become law, it has to be reauthorized by the 2021 session of the General Assembly. Throwaway styrofoam containers are made with polystyrene, a petroleum-based plastic, so it's not remotely sustainable. Dozens of jurisdictions nationwide have banned single-use styrofoam food containers. Virginia should join them. And I should add, just last week, Mexico City banned all single-use plastics. This is a very small step along that road. The second bill we're supporting is to automatically update Virginia's uniform building standards to meet international standards to increase energy efficiency of residential and commercial buildings. This bill is sponsored in the Senate by Senator Jennifer Boysko and in the House of Delegates by Kay Corey. And they'll both carry bills that will mandate adoption of international energy conservation codes within 12 months of publication and mandate local housing authorities to implement those changes. You know, Virginia's energy efficiency standards for buildings lag far behind international standards and a majority of other states. To limit greenhouse gases and address energy poverty, Virginia needs to emulate Maryland's requirement that new international standards be adopted within 12 months of publication. You know, our really weak residential building and energy efficiency standards increase operating costs for home buyers and renters, jeopardize the health and safety of Virginians, needlessly squander energy, and increase greenhouse gas emissions. It's time for Virginia to join Maryland in automatic adoption. The third area of that we're promoting bills in is to support the rapid transition to a clean and equitable transportation. You know, transportation produces almost half of Virginia's emissions of carbon dioxide, as well as particulate pollution that exacerbates health problems like asthma, especially for communities living near major roads. So FACS urges legislators to support the Advanced Clean Car Standards legislation being introduced by Delegate Lamont Bagby. We're also asking legislators to support the EV rebate legislation being introduced by Delegate David Reed, which started in 2022, would offer rebates for the purchase of EVs when they become available. The fourth area of legislation that we're promoting is to establish a green bank in Fairfax County and in other jurisdictions to speed the transition to a clean energy economy and fight climate change. This legislation is necessary because the Fairfax County attorney ruled that being that we're in a Dillon state, there needs to be an exception or a delegation of authority for jurisdictions to be able to create green banks. So there are 15 green banks in the United States today, from Hawaii to Rhode Island, and including 3 in our region: the DC Green Bank, the Montgomery County Green Bank, and the Climate Access Fund of Baltimore. Several different green bank models exist, but they all facilitate projects in low to moderate income communities that otherwise may not receive financing. Ultimately, green banks create jobs because installing a solar panel or upgrading the efficiency of a building means hiring labor. And most of those jobs don't require advanced degrees. A solar panel installer or a construction worker upgrading the energy efficiency of a home or a business can be a young person seeking a first job, a laid-off low-income worker, or a person of color looking for a leg up. This fits directly into the county's vision of One Fairfax. And if I might add, the Biden administration is supportive of green banks, as are other Democrats in Congress. A green bank in Florida received $2.9 million in financing from the Department of Energy 10 years ago to create their green bank. It's likely that similar amounts of money will come available as well. If this legislation is not passed to allow this exception to the green bank, allow this exception for the Dillon rule, then Virginia could very well miss out on the funding that is likely to be coming. The fifth area I will mention is to incentivize the preservation of large mature trees in all types of development projects. And so we do support Delegate Nancy Guy's bill to expand the scope of the tree code across the state. Now, at the local level, we support decreasing the energy burden on low-income communities, reducing the waste stream, protecting and increasing our tree canopy, modernizing our building codes, and supporting the transition to clean and equitable transportation. In the coming weeks, please watch for action alerts related to bills in the General Assembly, and we encourage you to join an advocacy team in one of our hubs. Sign up on our website under advocacy teams. I have been heartened by the enthusiasm and commitment of so many of you who have gotten involved in FACS advocacy. Our reputation and influence among elected officials continues to grow because of you. Now let's move on to our program. We have 3 great speakers covering topics ranging from zero waste to regional planning for carbon neutrality and climate resiliency. Following our speakers, there'll be a short advocacy training to prepare you for the exciting advocacy season ahead. First, I'd like to introduce Paul Connett, author of The Zero Waste Solution and Professor Emeritus in Environmental Chemistry at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York. Scientist turned activist, Paul Connett, a leading international figure in decades-long battles to fight pollution, has championed efforts to curtail overconsumption and keep industrial toxins out of our air and drinking waters and bodies. But he's best known around the world for leading efforts to help communities deal with their waste in sustainable ways. In other words, to eliminate and reuse waste rather than burn it or stow it away in landfills. So I'd like to turn it over to Professor Connett.
Thank you, Scott. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is to set my wife's cooking timer to 25 minutes. I should say I usually take over an hour in this presentation, and a lot of the color will have been taken away from it in order to get to this 25-minute deadline. But I will provide Meg a full PowerPoint for those who want it. So yes, you've introduced me. I first got involved in waste management when I was teaching chemistry at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York. I was involved in a battle to fight a local incinerator that became a national effort and a global effort. Between 85 and 95, our group, Work on Waste USA, helped communities stop the building of 300 incinerators in North America. And they've only built one since 1997. Since 1999, I have been promoting zero waste. And both fighting incineration and promoting zero waste has taken me to 49 states in the United States, 7 provinces in Canada, and 67 other countries. And the reason I stress that is I've learned most of what I know from the grassroots, from traveling. I travel, I learn, and then I share it with the next community, the next country. And now I'm going to try and get the technology to work. I'm going to share screen, and let's see. No, I thought at that point, let me share screen. We thought this might be a problem. I don't see, I'm supposed to be, I'm sorry, I can't find my PowerPoint. I'm hoping, do you see that on the screen, Meg? Is that on the screen? My PowerPoint? Hello? I'm going to continue as if it was on the screen, and just hope you can see it. So I'm excited by zero waste because it puts fighting climate change, which is what this symposium is about, into everyone's hands. And I'm going to begin with the global picture. Sustainability. We would need 5 planets if everyone consumed as much as the average American. Meanwhile, India and China are copying our consumption patterns. Clearly, something has got to change. And I believe the best place to start that change is with waste, because everybody connects with waste. All the time we're making waste, we're part of a non-sustainable way of living on this planet. But with good local leadership, we can all be part of a move towards sustainability, a move towards zero waste. Essentially, we have to convert a throwaway society to a sustainable society. In more modern parlance, we have to convert a linear economy to a circular economy. I'm sure you all know this, but let's go through the basics. The linear economy begins with the extraction of raw materials, then transporting those raw materials around the planet, and then manufacturing products, more transport, and then consumption. I would say overconsumption, stimulated by over-advertising. And then after a relatively short time from digging those resources out of the earth, we have waste. That is the linear economy. And it produces huge global impacts. All the environmental problems that we're concerned about stem from not limiting this linear economy. We use huge amounts of energy and extraction of raw materials, a huge amount of energy transporting them around the world, a huge amount of energy manufacturing products, more energy in transport, and so on and so on and so on. And all that energy use, of course, produces, amongst other things, carbon dioxide, which in turn produces climate change. So with that in mind, how do the different ways of handling waste impact this linear economy? Well, let's start at the beginning. Most people start with landfilling. Okay, well, if you bury your waste, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. You have to re-extract the raw materials and start the linear economy all over again. There's no movement towards the circular economy, no movement towards sustainability. Landfilling is not a sustainable solution. Incineration and gasification, same thing. If you burn these materials, you burn these objects, you've got to replace them. You go all the way back to the beginning. So incineration is not a solution. It perpetuates the linear economy. If you like, it's the last gasp of the linear economy on a finite planet. On the other hand, if you recycle your discarded materials, then you don't need the extraction. You can go straight back to industrial production. Better still, if you reuse the whole product, you cut out both the impacts of extraction and production. And the similar argument applies to composting organics, avoiding a certain amount of synthetic fertilizers and avoiding the production of some nitrogen oxides produced by using using nitrates, chemicals, instead of organic composting. Now, this picture from England, you can see the linear economy on the left, slightly different language, raw materials, production, use, residual waste. Then you can see, how do you get to a circular economy? You cut out, you drastically reduce the impact of raw materials, you drastically reduce the amount of waste that comes out of the system, and voila, you have a circular economy. Rather simplistic, but we'll go into more details. The thing I've learned is that the waste problem will not be solved with magic machines. It's not a high-tech problem. You're going to solve it with better organization, better education, and better industrial design. So now we've got to the center of my talk, which is zero waste. As I mentioned before, I've been promoting this since 1999. And in 2013, published this book, The Zero Waste Solution. Notice the subtitle, Untrashing the Planet One Community at a Time. This is a bottom-up movement, not top-down. To achieve or get close to zero waste, we need community responsibility at the back end. And some communities are right now very good at that. We also need industrial responsibility at the front end, particularly with disposable materials. And we need good political leadership to bring those two together. And we also need the involvement of universities. We need academic responsibility. So I'll show you how we relate to all those things in the 10 steps to zero waste. If I had more time, I would go into the details of all these steps, but I'm going to start at the beginning and then pick and choose some of the issues which I think help to define zero waste as opposed to just more recycling, and some other steps which I think pertain to community development, which is critical. So step one, source separation. The 10 things on the end of our hands. This is what makes waste. If we mix everything together, we get waste. If you separate, you get resources. Step two is how we pick up those resources. And the ideal is door-to-door collection. And we need door-to-door collection. And this is very important. We need door-to-door collection because to get food waste, we need it to get food waste clean. And we need the food waste clean because we need to use it in agriculture, which also relates to sustainability. We need sustainable agriculture fed by compost, etc. So in San Francisco, one of the first jurisdictions in the United States which collected food waste separately from homes and from restaurants and hotels. So in San Francisco, once a week, your discarded materials are picked up, a blue container for the recyclables, a green container for the compostables, a black container for the residuals, once a week. In Italy, they have, I think, more elegant systems. In Capanari, which is near Lucca in Tuscany, this first town to declare zero waste in Italy, they have the same vehicles picking up different materials on different days. So in this place, in this graph, on Mondays, they pick up the organics. On Tuesdays, the mixed recyclables. On Wednesdays, the paper. On Thursdays, the residual fraction, and so on throughout the week. Spain is copying in certain areas in Spain, particularly in Basque Country. They're copying this, what they call the Italian method. So here you see the same calendar for pickup. But the difference is in Spain, they don't put their containers for this discarded materials on the ground. They put it on hooks on walls. Here, and each household has a number. Here it's 1870, and that number is on each of their containers for the organics, the recyclables, and so on. one hook for one household. And if you don't have a big wall, you can do the same thing on these stainless steel posts, which look very attractive. It looks as if this community really cares. And look at the quality of their separation of the organics. This is remarkable. They're getting the organics with this system, that brown container that you saw, 99.76% pure. That's making absolutely fabulous, safe, and clean compost. So let's talk about composting. If we look at it from a world point of view, composting would decrease solid waste in developing countries by 50 to 80%. But sadly, many of these developing countries are being seduced by Europe and Japan to build huge money-sucking incinerators instead of the simplest step of getting the compost out of the cities to the rural areas. That would be a much better, a much simpler, much safer, a much more sustainable solution. There's a hierarchy. With discarded food waste, the first thing we need is to feed people. We need to get the food from hotels that's not being consumed in the kitchens to people, needed people. After that, we need to feed animals. And then we feed the soil. We need healthy soil to produce healthy people, to produce a healthy community. The composting hierarchy. First, do it in your backyard. Do it on site in schools. Do it as locally as you possible. Cut out the transport. And then if you can't do it in individual locations, share it with the other households. Community composting. We've got some wonderful examples of that. And also use farmers. Farmers should be paid to take a certain rich fraction of the organic waste and co-compost it with their manure and so on and make a very high-grade compost and earn them some extra cash. And then after all that, we need a centralized facility, which might be a composting facility, or it might be anaerobic digestion, or it might be, very excitingly in Malaysia, they're pioneering using the black soldier fly larvae to consume and use up organic waste of all kinds to produce larvae, and which is harvested for protein, for fish food, and for chicken feed and so on. And this can be done in the city. There's no odor involved at all. Now in San Francisco, they have a 25%, it's 25% cheaper to put out clean organic waste in the green container than to put out mixed waste. And I'm happy to say in San Francisco, the helpers, the kitchen workers and so on, very well educated on this, and they're very proud of what they're doing. If you don't believe me, go to Fisherman's Wharf and ask the waiter about their composting program, about their organic separation. This is all destined to go to a large composting facility about 70 miles from San Francisco. It's surrounded by farmland. The farmers are using the compost to grow fruit and vegetables, which go back to San Francisco. In addition, there are 200 vineyards using this compost from San Francisco to grow wine, to produce wine, because it's a very good compost, holds on to moisture. And in a hot climate, as you've got in, the wine country north of San Francisco, you need, this reduces the amount of irrigation that you need, and it provides a steady supply of moisture to the roots. I'm going to jump now to the Zero Waste Research Center, because this helps to define and refine what we mean by zero waste and why it is different from just more recycling. This is the message. The message of the Zero Waste Center is to take a message from the community to industry. If we can't reuse it, if we can't recycle it, or if we can't compost it, industry shouldn't be making it. We need better industrial design for the 21st century. This is the big difference. This is the advance. With the current system, landfills and incinerators make these residuals disappear. They make our lack of sustainability disappear. We, fighting zero waste and fighting for sustainability, have to make the residual fraction very, very visible. And we do that in zero waste research centers. Now, here is what zero waste is on one slide. It's a combination of community responsibility, the familiar 3 R's, and don't forget the C of compost. This is going pretty well in many communities. So compost is the weak link in many places. And then combine that with industrial responsibility, where we introduce the fourth R of redesign. Redesign. So these zero waste research centers, we need to involve local universities. But my preference is that they do not get located in universities, they get located downtown so that we can integrate the efforts of the local community, community activists, community folks with the professors and students, that they work on this together. It's hands-on stuff. The professors can learn from the community can learn from the professors. We need to examine the residual fraction. We need to look at our mistakes. We need to identify non-reusable objects and non-recyclable materials in packaging. We need to recommend better industrial designs. We need to work with industrial designers. We need researchers to research all the efforts going around the world, and Scott mentioned one, of countries and communities banning or taxing bad packaging, single-use plastics, and so on. That's happening all over the world, but we need to know about it. We need to learn from everybody else, and that's where the research center comes in. The first Zero Waste Research Center was set up in Capanari in 2010, led by Rossano Ercolini, who's a primary school teacher, but one of the best activists in Italy. Now, this is very close to my heart. I love the notion of community reuse and repair centers. And we are very familiar with many versions of this, from Goodwill Industries, from Salvation Army, from local thrift stores, and so on. This is on a community basis, reuse and repair. And the reason that this is so important is reusable items are only 2% of the total discard materials. But look, they are worth well over a third of the value. So recycling is high volume, low value. Reuse is low volume, high value. And this is where the jobs are. This is where the green businesses are going to be in your community once you get this going. Here's an example: Urban Ore in Berkeley, California, run by Dan Knapp, a former sociology professor, and his wife, Mary van de Venter. And they have helped to protect the language. You know, one of the first things that happens in waste is the waste wars, is they try to reclaim the language. In 1985, when I first got involved, they called incinerators resource recovery facilities. This is Orwellian for resource destruction facilities. Anyway, Urban Ore has been operating for 30 years. It's grossing $3 million a year, 37 full-time well-paid jobs. Dan is about to retire. He's going to pass the business over to his workers. When you go in, it's like a shopping mall, but for secondhand goods, all secondhand, third, fourth-hand goods, and it's all kinds of things, everything. Building materials are particularly valuable. Dan is an expert on doors, and he knows the value of what value certain doors have. In Vermont, they've gone one step further. They train people. They take people off the street, and within 9 months, they've trained them to repair either large appliances, small appliances, electrical goods, even computers, and they help them to get jobs. They also link to a deconstruction business which takes down buildings carefully, uses materials in new buildings, or making things like furniture. This is an example of a value-added business. Beautiful furniture being made from the wood from barns and churches and you name it. Jobs, 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 jobs. Reuse and repair centers. We are literally, this is the circular economy. This is the circular economy exists right now in these reuse centers. Job creation, job training, of course, linked to deconstruction and value-added enterprises. This is where you can do a huge amount of community education. People love these places. Demonstrate backyard composting and worm bins. Be a collection depot for household toxics and get money back for doing that, providing that service. Community development, deliberately recreating the village within the anonymous city. And we can have fun with reuse centers. In Sweden, they have a reuse park in Gothenburg, When you drive, large area, when you drive there, there's a band to welcome you. When you walk around, you've got clowns to entertain the kids. When you go to the toilet, there's an art gallery, all kinds of exhibitions, all kinds of fun things, including this dog, this famous dog, can separate mixed recyclables into 6 different categories. Economic incentives, the pay-as-you-throw system, probably the most famous. Here, there's no surcharge for the compostables. There's no surcharge for the recyclables, but for the residuals, yes. The more you make, the more you pay. Or to put it more positively, the less you make, the more you save. And this is how it works in Seattle. You choose the size of container that you're going to use for residuals, but the bigger you choose, the more money you pay each month. In Italy, you have a reusable bag with a chip in it. You only pay when you put it out. And how close are we getting to zero waste using these first 7 steps? Answer: in Italy, 40 provinces above 65%. Treviso was population 1 million at 88%. Nearly 3,000 municipalities over 70%, 1,000 over 80%, 112 over 90%. What we're talking about here is diversion. How much total are you diverting from disposal? In San Francisco, population 850,000, very little space. They hit the 80% mark by 2011. But how about going beyond 80%? Many communities would be happy with 80%. But how can we go further? The answer is to build a residual separation and biological stabilization facility in front of the landfill, which is what they've done in Nova Scotia. Here, the discarded residuals come into this building. More recyclables, more toxics are taken out of conveyor belts. The dirty organic fraction gets to the end. It's shredded, it's stabilized before it goes to the landfill. Going back to the 10 steps, here we are again with step 10, the transition landfill, because we hope with steps 1 through 9, by the time we get to 2030, there won't be much going into it. And what's going into it has been screened and is much, much safer. I like this because it begins with everyone. It begins with source separation, everybody's 2 hands. But by the time we get to 6 and 9, we are using the best minds, our professors, our students, our industrial designers, working with the creativity of the community. And I can't stress enough, community, creativity, children, and communication. Those are the 4 C's to support the 4 R's. So summarizing, zero waste, it's better for the economy, more jobs, it's better for our health, it's less toxics, it's better for our universities, more meaning, more relevance. It's better for the planet. It is more sustainable, and it's better for our children because it offers them more hope for the future. A series of practical, cost-effective steps, giving them a roadmap towards sustainability. And that is where I'm going to escape. I should be back on screen.
Well, I don't escape. That's no, you what you just told us, Professor, was so inspiring. Thank you so much. Reusing, repairing, recycling. That is why, we're asking Fairfax County to pass a resolution to establish a zero waste goal. You were wonderful, Professor. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's such a positive movement. I mean, you can only go so far saying no to something, Scott, as you know. You've got to say yes to something. And we're saying yes to recycling, yes to composting, yes to reuse, yes to repair, yes to zero waste research, yes, 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 and yes to sustainability. People need positive things in their lives. We've got too many negatives right now. We need something positive.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So our next speaker is Maya Davis, who is a senior environmental planner on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Climate and Energy team. Ms. Davis manages the Regional Climate and Energy Action Plan, and her work focuses on tracking progress towards the plan's goal and implementing initiatives to support the region in meeting the plan's goals. She serves on the Sustainable Maryland Certified Executive Committee and was formerly the National Capital Region's team lead for the White House Climate Action Champions Program. Maybe you'll be going back, Ms. Davis. In 2006, Maya earned a master's degree from Georgia Institute of Technology in City and Regional Planning with specializations in environmental planning and geographical information systems. She earned her Bachelor's of Science from the University of Maryland's Eastern Shore. I present Maya Davis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. What I'm going to talk today about is a bit about climate planning in metropolitan Washington, mainly focusing on our newly adopted Regional 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan. Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, who I work for, is known in short as COG, and we have 24 local government members and represent over 300 elected officials that serve our region. Region Forward is our vision and mission for a more prosperous, accessible, livable, sustainable, and equitable region. Climate and energy is a focused goal area underneath Region Forward, and I work on the climate and energy team that supports regional collaborative climate action planning and initiatives. COG established one of the first regional climate programs in the country and have been working on climate planning and action since 2007. We adopted our first regional goals in 2008 and established our Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee in 2009. So we work through this climate policy group as well as several technical committees and a public advisory committee that support this policy group. We work with our local government members and stakeholders to develop model policies, plans, and programs. We provide training and leverage our resources to support local implementation. And we support local governments in tracking progress towards both our local and regional goals. And we have 10 principles that guide our collaborative work together. I won't go through all of these, but we work together to facilitate application at scale. We want to be leaders and lead by example for our communities. We work across a variety of different communities in 3 very different states of DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So we always look to be flexible in how each community implements action towards meeting our common goals. We want to support community leadership, and advocacy has always been a continual priority throughout the years in our work. So I wanted to just highlight a few examples of some of our past work that I believe align with the Faith Alliance interests and advocacy goals, particularly highlighting some of our advocacy initiatives. We actually have a climate and energy legislative committee that advocates at the state levels, at DC, Maryland, and Virginia, but also at the federal levels for policy and programs that support greenhouse gas reduction and enhance resilience in the region. Some of our priority advocacy areas have been deployment of clean energy and technology, expanding at clean energy finance, enhancing energy security and resilience, as well as air quality and public health. In Virginia, for example, in recent years, we've focused on solar legislation, renewable portfolio standards, and CPACE, or Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Programs, which is an energy finance program for commercial property owners. One example of our solar initiatives has been sort of the history of our solar initiatives, where we partnered with EPA Green Power Program and our local government members to conduct 170 site assessments on public facilities. And then we worked with our localities on how to coordinate on bulk solar procurements. We followed that by working with the U.S. Department of Energy Sunshot Initiative and our members on adopting model solar permitting and inspection guidelines and launching solar co-ops in a dozen communities throughout the region, many of which continue to launch additional co-op rounds to this day. We work with our Public Advisory Committee in particular has had environmental justice as a priority for 5 or 6 years now. And they worked with environmental justice advocates throughout the region to develop a toolkit of guidance for local governments on how to incorporate environmental justice into their climate and energy programs. So our past work of COG and its members led to recognition by the Obama administration as a White House Climate Action Champion back in 2014 and helped us further along some of our implementation efforts. And in 2019, the Global Covenant of Mayors recognized COG and our members as U.S. metro scale climate leaders. At that time, our leadership was starting to set its sights beyond 2020. And decided it was a great time to become a GCOM signatory. So becoming a GCOM signatory means that we were going to follow global best practices in climate planning for the development of our 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan. And we were able to get support from GCOM throughout the planning process to make sure that we were meeting their high standards in climate planning. The 4 main elements of the plan are looking at our greenhouse gases, our past trends, our future projections, and what will it take to get to our 2030 goal. Then we identified a strategy, a mitigation strategy of collaborative actions towards meeting that goal. We also conducted a climate risk and vulnerability assessment and then developed a resilience strategy to help work together to reduce those climate risks that were identified in the assessment. So let's talk about mitigation for a moment. The original goals that we set back in 2008 were 10% below projected levels by 2012, and we've met that goal. The next goal is 20% by 2020, which we might not meet even in a COVID world. We'll talk about a little bit about that. And 80% by 2050. And our board, as well as the Regional Transportation Planning Board, adopted a 50% by 2030 goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels. And that aligns with the global need to keep temperature increases to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this looks at our past trends in a bit more detail. More than 90% of our emissions come from the built environment and transportation. It's about 50% from our buildings and 40% from transportation. And so our efforts to reduce emissions have focused around this core area of over 90% of our emissions, and it will continue to focus on these priority areas. Overall in the region, we've reduced our emissions by 13%. Since 2005. We also evaluated why emissions have changed over time. This graph is a high-level summary of the reasons that our emissions have increased, which is on the left in red, and decreased on the right in blue. And reasons for increases have been population growth and commercial floor area growth, including the growth of high energy intensity industries, such as data centers in Northern Virginia are one example of those. But they don't outweigh the decreases. And the reason our emissions are decreasing is because we have a cleaner electric grid, cleaner cars on our roads, and actually per person, we're driving a bit less. Total emissions will remain flat through 2030 with no future action. So this accounts for population growth, economy, vehicle miles traveled, and savings from on-the-books actions that have already been taken. So they'll remain pretty flat if we do nothing moving forward from here. But this is what it will take to get to our 50% by 2030 goal. And our core focus areas are clean electricity, zero energy buildings, zero emission vehicles, and zero waste. So the 3 zeros right there, right? We also need to influence travel behavior and enhance our tree canopy. And I believe the Faith Alliance advocacy priorities align well with these priority action areas. This slide looks a little bit closer in more detail about the level of implementation that we'll need to meet this 50% by 2030 goal. And just to throw out a couple examples here, we feel like we've had a tremendous growth in rooftop solar systems over the past 10 years. We went from under 500 systems to close to 50,000 systems over the past 10 years. But in the next 10 years, to help meet a 50% by 2030 goal, we are going to need 200,000 more additional rooftop solar systems or the equivalent of that. So that's a really heavy lift. Another example is hybrid and electric vehicles over the past 10 years have grown to become about 3% of the cars on our road today in metropolitan Washington. But to support meeting the 50% by 2030 goal, we're going to need electric vehicles to make up about 30% of light-duty vehicles on the road. So what are our collaborative actions that we plan to do about this? So I'm not going to go through all of this, but of course, COG will need to continue to support local plan, policy, and program development in all of these areas. The most effective and biggest chunk of what is going to get us to that clean electricity wedge that was in the chart on the previous slide is the state renewable portfolio standards. So part of our advocacy will be continue to support utility scale solar and offshore wind to help achieve these state level renewable portfolio standards. I'd also like to point out sustainable energy access for all. This is a newer requirement and priority that's called for by the Global Covenant of Mayors, or GCOM. And a part of that is reducing energy burden, which I know is a priority for the Faith Alliance as well. This map from our plan looks at energy burden and equity emphasis areas. These equity emphasis areas include communities that have a higher than average concentration of low income minority populations or both in the metropolitan Washington region. And energy burden looks at the percent of household incomes that goes towards energy cost. And what this map is showing is that energy burden across the census tracts and these communities in the region is over 6% higher in the equity emphasis areas compared to other census tracts in the region. And we did utilize the U.S. Department of Energy LEAD tool, and I would encourage you all to take a look at this tool. You can Google it, find it pretty easily, and you can zoom in and look at your own individual community energy burdens. So here's some more of our actions here. We have focused on light duty electrification a lot over the past 10 years, but more and more, and certainly in this plan and moving forward to 2030, we're also going to be focusing more on the medium and heavy duty vehicles, particularly of interest lately. And what our stakeholders and members are working on is school and transit buses and electrification of those. And then, of course, we also have zero waste in here, which our former speakers spoke a lot about. And there's a lot that falls under these umbrella actions. But sort of the key areas of there are the organics recycling that we talked about, reducing solid waste and building circularity. And of course, tree canopy is also a major priority of ours as well. So in terms of our goals for resilience, we are looking for all of our local governments to assess current and future climate risks and actively integrate climate planning across government plans, operations, and communications, both internally between departments as well as externally with the community. And then we also need to really make significant progress towards fully becoming a resilient region. This is a summary of our climate risk and vulnerability assessment. And the biggest risks facing our region are extreme heat and flooding. And then our biggest challenges are our infrastructure and providing basic services, particularly for our vulnerable communities during and after events. Heat is the #1 cause of weather-related injuries and fatalities in the region. And this map shows the number of extreme heat days from 1986 to 2016, overlaid with our equity emphasis areas again. And our equity emphasis areas are slightly more heavily burdened by extreme heat compared to the rest of the region. And where these people live, these potentially vulnerable populations can face greater barriers like access to air conditioning, housing, cooling centers are examples of why these particular communities may need some additional attention and support during extreme heat events. Now, looking forward, future trends are showing that the region could have up to 80 days of 95-degree weather in a calendar year. So it's certainly something we think will be an increasing issue in the region. Populations with socioeconomic barriers, including low-income households, elderly, people in substandard housing, individuals with language barriers, they all face greater challenges in preparing and responding to flooding events. And what this map is showing you here is that 60% of our equity emphasis areas have a floodplain that run through them. And this is where about 1 million people currently reside. Also, something notable here is that over half of our region's equity emphasis areas are in the Anacostia watershed, which is burdened by a lot of flooding events. More than 10% of our equity emphasis areas will be affected by a 6-foot sea level rise, and more than 100,000 people currently live in these equity emphasis areas. So these maps are supposed to help serve as a starting point for our local jurisdictions to work with these communities to further identify the most vulnerable populations and how they will be impacted by, all of these climate risks. So here's our actions and what we plan to take on to help reduce our risks and vulnerabilities. And so there's still a lot of planning work that has to be done in this area to address these risks. But we're also going to be working on engaging and supporting our potentially vulnerable populations. And then resilient infrastructure is also very important moving forward. And this looks at critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, microgrids, as well as the green infrastructure piece. And I'd like to leave you with some local climate action resources here. And, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments is always here to support our local government members. There's a lot of other programs nationally and statewide that support, as well as internationally. And just one that I'll mention here because it's a newer one on the list is the United Nations launched the Race to Zero campaign to mobilize public and private sector to make carbon neutral commitments in advance of COP26, which is the UN climate conference in the UK this November. And so there's a big push to have local communities, regions, states, private sector, universities, et cetera, sign on to this campaign. With that, I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Maya. That was wonderful. Hey, first of all, I want to say we're doing pretty well on time. So if anybody has any questions, please enter them into the comment period or the comment area on the screen. For years, Fairfax County was the laggard in our region's climate goals, and that's going to soon change with the Community-Wide Climate and Energy Plan, or CCAP, once it's finished, adopted by the Board of Supervisors, and implemented by the community. FACS activists have been leaders in pushing Fairfax County forward, and thanks to all FACS activists who've been involved in that, and the leadership of you and your colleagues, Maya.
Yeah, thank you. We'll definitely continue to support the county and their efforts.
Yep. Natalie, do we have any questions? Well, if not, oh, here's one. I'll read it for you. Obviously, you can see it. We're putting it right up on the screen. How is COG funded?
So we have various funding streams. We have a membership dues for local governments pay for maybe off the top of my head. I don't have the budget right in front of me, but maybe about a third of the climate and energy team's fees. We have an environmental fund, and we also have a lot of federal funding and private funding. We definitely try to leverage the little bit of funding we get from our local governments to go out and get federal grants and technical assistance and other opportunities to directly support local implementation efforts. So I'd be happy to share with the Faith Alliance our specific budget documents, which are published online, if you're interested in looking at more detail of that.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Rick, for the question. Any other questions? Well, we might be letting you off easy, Maya. We'll give you one more second to throw in a question. If not, we'll move on to our next speaker.
Great. I'm looking forward to hearing Corey. We also work with Corey and the Northern Virginia Regional Planning Commission on a regular basis to support our local communities.
Great. Okay. Well, let's move on then. So our next speaker is Corey Miles, who is a senior environmental planner and coastal program manager of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Corey is an environmental scientist with 15 years of experience specializing in regional planning and management of water resources. She's been a senior environmental planner for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission since 2013. And in this role, Corey has been the lead planner and project manager for several major projects, including the Regional Stormwater Education Program, the Regional Native Plant Campaign, and Regional Climate Resiliency Planning Initiative. Corey also serves as a member of the Virginia Coastal Policy Team and the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan Technical Advisory Team. Oh my gosh, we were lucky to get her. Prior to joining NRVC, Corey worked for the Maryland Department of Environment and also the private sector as a consultant. Corey has a BS in Wildlife and Fisheries Biology, a MS in Environmental Science, and she lives in Manassas. Corey Miles.
All right, do you see my screen here? Ah, there it is. Let me just get into screen view here. There we go. All right, so as Scott said, my name is Corey Miles. I work for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. We are similar to COG, a regional body of government. I work there as an environmental planner, and NVRC is a little bit different than COG in that we are actually a state agency funded by a combination of state funds as well as local funds from our member local governments. And since we only represent Northern Virginia, we are just a much smaller agency. So we are governed by a board of elected officials. And our purpose is to convene stakeholders and to coordinate studies on topics that are of regional importance. So one of these topics includes issues related to the coastal environment and the Chesapeake Bay. So in this capacity is where I come in to manage the coastal program for the commission, which includes coordinating studies and planning for a variety of issues, including tidal wetlands, shoreline erosion, non-point source pollution, sea level rise, and flooding, and this topic of coastal resiliency. Okay, so enough about me. I have a lot of information I want to cover for you today. First, I'm going to cover some of the recent climate and resilience developments that have been adopted by Virginia in the last legislative session. Some of the things that our own local governments are doing, some newly released tools and information that can help you to understand, visualize, and communicate some of the most important current and anticipated changes to the climate here in Northern Virginia, and talk about our resilient infrastructure programs. The 2020 session of the General Assembly had a surprising record of accomplishments on the resilience and climate adaptation front. No doubt FACS had a role in that. A number of new laws were enacted to help Virginia address sea level rise, flooding, and other climate change impacts. So now, right now, these laws are being put into effect, and there are several public comment periods that are currently open, which allow you to have a say in how these new rules will be enacted. So please don't hesitate to make your voices heard. One very important bill was HB 981, which allowed Virginia to join RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's a market-based compact among the New England and Mid-Atlantic states to reduce CO2 emissions. So the auction process for the CO2 allowances generates funding, lots of funding, tens of millions of dollars actually, which will be allocated to two funding streams in Virginia. One for low-income energy efficiency programs, and two, the newly reconstituted Community Flood Preparedness Fund. So the program has the potential to really make an impact for flood protection and sea level rise adaptation efforts in Virginia. Provisions also allow the law to, or allow the funds to be used for studies like updates of the rainfall intensity curves for Virginia and local government resilience plans. HB 504 was enacted to modify the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. Initially, CBPA was established as a water quality program, was recently modified by Governor Northam to include coastal resilience and adaptation to sea level rise and climate change as one of the purposes of the act. So this change will trigger new regulations and could provide Virginia localities with a new adaptation tool. And the State Water Control Board is accepting comments on this now. So please take a look at some of these this legislation and reach out if you need any more guidance on this. SB 776 makes living shorelines a default option for shoreline erosion control unless the applicant can show that the living shoreline will not work on the specific location. This will help to increase the use of nature-based shorelines across the Commonwealth. And HB 1164 adds climate change to the purposes of Virginia DEQ by requiring the agency develop and implement regulatory approaches to reduce climate pollution. Let's see, HB 1313 is, let me change this here. Is that better? I just got a text from Meg. HB 1313 creates a Chief Resilience Officer position in Virginia to lead the state's adaptation and resilience efforts. Okay, and here at the local level, all of your motivation and advocacy from FACS and others has really made a difference in the region in the past 2 years, especially. We are collectively, as a region, moving forward to try to mitigate impacts on climate change while simultaneously planning for the changes that we are experiencing now, as well as what we are projected to experience over the 50 to 80-year planning horizon. And Fairfax County is proactively working to address climate change and its various impacts, primarily through these 2 separate initiatives that Scott just mentioned: the community-wide energy and climate action plan, that is developing strategies to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan, which is just now getting underway. And this plan will identify and address risks related to infrastructure and other areas of concern within the county. And as you may know, there are primarily 3 climate stressors that are anticipated to have a major impact on the landscape of Northern Virginia in the coming years. Precipitation, one, particularly this trend towards really heavy downpours that leads to flash flooding in urban areas. Heat, extreme heat days over 95 degrees. And one thing that's particularly dangerous is this increase in warm nights, where the temperature doesn't have a chance to dip down below 70 degrees. And that's when the body itself cannot really cool down. Sea level rise and storm surge, primarily affecting, tidal rivers below Great Falls. So I'll just go through some of these stressors really quickly before we get to our dashboard, which really allows you to dive into some of this information. On July 8th, 2019, some of you probably remember, almost 5 inches of rain fell in Northern Virginia, particularly in Arlington. Inland flash flooding occurred. It was a traffic nightmare. Roads turned into raging rivers. Several metro stations closed. More than 100 water rescues were conducted throughout the area. Arlington County estimates $3.5 million in flood damages just to their own county property. Multiple sinkholes, polluted runoff, trash, debris flowing into our waterways. And flooding was accelerated primarily due to the inability of our culverts and our surrounding landscape to absorb this runoff. Extreme heat will become more of a problem as more dangerous heat days and longer heat waves increase. Poor air quality puts an increased risk of illness on vulnerable populations. The risks from extreme heat can also affect the regional economy by straining the electric grid, impacting the transportation networks, the water supply, military bases unable to carry out their missions. And under the current high emission scenario, and Maya already said this, we could get an average of 75 or 80 degrees above 95 degrees. And tidal water bodies in Northern Virginia will also be affected by sea level rise and higher storm surge. The effects could reduce assessed property value by $4.5 billion. And all of this information is available for you to freely browse and download, use via our climate resilience dashboard, which I will hop in here for just a second. Here it is. This dashboard is on our website, and I can make sure that the link is forwarded to everybody after the presentation. But basically, you can go in here and look at information related to temperature, sea level rise, precipitation. One thing that we are particularly proud of is this interactive heat island map, which allows you to explore where you are seeing higher temperatures on the land surface. So in particular, you will see the red areas are, the deep red areas are these, are hot, you know, so there's basically a 20 degrees difference. And you can zoom in, you can take this is the tree canopy layer, so you can uncover and cover different portions of the map if you want to look at places in Fairfax, along the Route 1 corridor, you know, Lorton, Fort Belvoir area. You can see there's a significant heat island there. And if you slide over, you can see that the tree canopy is largely absent in that area. And then you can also use the slider to see development. This is showing up here as an impervious cover layer. And same thing, you can use the slider to go back and forth. We also have the social vulnerability index that you can slide over. It consists of 5 layers that together form an index, including the socioeconomic information, social vulnerability, household composition, minority, language, housing, transportation. So you can use this to see if, let's see, around Manassas Park, you can see there's a heat island there. And if you scroll over, if you slide this over, you can see that the darker purple area indicates that it's considered high vulnerability by the Virginia CDC. And this is by census tract. There's also information here on how this map was created. So it was done through remotely sensed data. So I encourage you to go take a look at this, play around with it. The map is really cool. I could look at it all day long. And if you want to look at sea level rise, you can also do that. This shows different aspects of sea level rise. And then this, of course, the interactive map and dashboard here. So the dashboard is a very cool part of this. It shows the parcels that are impacted, the number of parcels that are, whoops, I'm in Maryland here. So you can choose different scenarios. If you want to look at the 5-foot scenario, the number of parcels impact, the number of acres impacted, and the amount of property value that's impacted. And if you want to get out of this, and look at precipitation, there are also a number of tools here to show you the data related to extreme events. This is done for the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, so you could, choose to zero in on Fairfax County, or let's see here. And it's showing here the change in the average annual number of days with precipitation above 2 inches relative to a historic period in time. So if you look at West Falls Church, you can see the information related to that, and so forth. So this is just one of the maps. There's also projections on how precipitation is projected to change under different scenarios. And, I could spend all day just looking at all of these things, but you can see here, Northern Virginia is definitely projected to see this increased trend in extreme precipitation. Let's see, you can change the time period here. All the way up to 2095. And then you can always, this information is downloadable. So you can download it. You can take a screenshot of it. You can share it on your social media pages. And you can also go directly to the source of the information, most of which came from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration through a program they've created called the Mid-Atlantic Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessment Program, also known as MARISA. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. There we go. Okay. So again, the urban heat island map shows you where you will see projected or observed temperature really clearly. Let's see here. Oops. And yeah, and then here, this also will show, so the dashboard shows you, how the extreme precipitation events will increase throughout Northern Virginia. Events like July 8th, 2019 could happen every 10 years. And it's a really great source of information for you to use. And also, we are partnering with George Mason University to use some of this information and feed it into what is called a hydrologic model. And you can use that model to understand how these extreme precipitation events might impact stormwater infrastructure, and use it to produce different risk scenarios. And the outcome of this work will hopefully consist of a flood resilience framework to help support the regional authority to better prepare for these changes. And if you want to talk about some of the qualities of resilient infrastructure, I really think that having infrastructure that's robust, meaning that there are multiple ways to get to the same thing. So if you want to electrify the transportation network. You have electric vehicles, you have electric scooters, you have e-bikes. Redundant. Also, you know, if you want to have clean energy, you have solar options, you have wind energy, infrastructure that has multiple benefits. You're seeing here a stream channel that's been restored. It now provides flood control. It also provides pollinator habitat and tree canopy. And here, something that's a really cool innovation that you might be able, it's live now in Merrifield. It's called the OLLI, the autonomous, I don't know what OLLI actually stands for, but it's an autonomous vehicle. And it's basically a shuttle. It's still in the experimental stages, but we worked with Fort Belvoir to kind of test it out on military bases before Fairfax County adopted it and is now testing it out in Merrifield in the Mosaic District. And I particularly love these green columns as one idea. This is actually from Mexico City, but I think it would be something really neat to see in places like Tyson's Corner, where you have the elevated metro and those huge concrete pillars. And the green columns are carbon absorbing. So they help to absorb emissions from vehicles traveling on the highway right there, as well as providing habitat for pollinators and shade for passerbys, pedestrians, and you know, being prepared for future scenarios, understanding what's possible, and anticipating, using modeling, any sharing information among university partners, jurisdictions, state, local, federal governments, and equitable. And just to talk quickly about who is affected by sea level rise at 5 feet. We are talking about approximately 917 households in the Fairfax area would be displaced. So in terms of who that is, the population over age 65, you can see here the majority of the population is, oh, okay. So yes, you can see some of these condominium areas. There is a pretty good chunk of the population that is over 65. And definitely a good chunk of the population that is from a minority. And at 5 feet of sea level rise, you could see across the region, $778 million of assessed property would be impacted. And infrastructure, including roads, railroad tracks, parks, parking garages, especially street-side parked cars, and then historic and cultural sites. And some of the programs that NVRC offers are to help support a resilient region are also found on the dashboard. One that I like to point out, because Maya talked about rooftop solar as a major component to increase our share of clean power, is the solar map. So if you go back into the dashboard and you want to take a look at the solar map, it actually calculates for every building in Northern Virginia how much solar can be produced by your rooftop. So you can look up your own home and see how much solar energy your roof could produce. And also a number of other programs that NVRC supports or offers. And I've just been informed by Meg that my time is up. So with that, you know, we live in an urban area. So there's always going to be some gray infrastructure, but it's a balancing act. But building resilient infrastructure will ultimately foster a more sustainable environment and economy, and especially in the space of increased uncertainty, it'll equip our communities to bounce back after an adverse event. So we want to support forward-looking infrastructure design and planning, anything increased building standards that Scott mentioned to help reduce exposure and vulnerability to the impacts of climate change and reduce our energy use, while also providing some of these multiple benefits. Is something that NVRC is going to support over the coming decades through our work with our local government partners and other groups. And with that, I am going to hand it back over to Meg or Scott. Hold on.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Corey. This has been wonderful. You know, we're lucky to have the NVRC doing such important work here, and that dashboard is really amazing. I know a lot of us are going to be eating it up. So thank you so much for sharing it. I think we had one question. Did we have one question? Or has that really been answered? Oh, we do have one question from Jean Wright. I'll read it. Now we don't have much time for it to stay on schedule, but I'll read it anyway. So we're gonna have to keep your answer brief. What a great tool for policy and advocacy action, particularly including climate justice. Do you have a specific recommendation related to climate justice given the dashboard data?
Yeah, absolutely. Take a look at the social vulnerability index layer, overlay that with the heat island map, and see where there's a potential to increase tree canopy or potentially do outreach to different groups to inform them about resources available at the county level, like a cooling center or something like that. But I think the low-hanging fruit is, you know, increasing tree canopy, especially in those urban heat islands.
Yep.
So that would be kind of like my easiest recommendation.
Well, we're on it. So thank you so much for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's turn now to the final portion of our big shoe. I want to introduce Anthony Granato. You know, Anthony joined the FACS Board of Directors last November. We're grateful for his participation and counsel. He serves, his day job is Vice President of Government Relations for Catholic Charities USA. And since May, he's ran that organization since May of 2019. Anthony directs the social policy team at CCUSA, who analyze and make recommendations on legislative and regulatory affairs in service to the mission of Catholic Charities, and the member agencies, and the clients that are served on a daily basis throughout the country. He works primarily on the federal level, but he's going to share some of his knowledge and insights with us today. Prior to coming to CCUSA, Anthony served as director of the Office of Domestic Social Development at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, where he managed a policy team providing analysis on U.S. domestic policy in service to the Catholic bishops of the United States. So with that, I give you Mr. Anthony Granato.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to, can everyone see my screen and see what the slides are? Anyway, Anthony Granato, thank you, Scott, for the introduction. I'm currently the Vice President of Government Relations. Catholic Charities USA is my day job. And I've been working in the field of government relations, you know, since graduate school, and I've done everything from provide basically lobbying at the local level, city level, county level, to accompanying an archbishop to the White House to meet with President Obama in the West Wing, to meeting with congressional staff who were 2 weeks out of college and who had basically very little understanding of the issues I was bringing, but they were there to represent their boss. So today I want to go through just very quickly kind of an advocacy 101, and I'm going to do it from the federal policy, kind of federal level. I've done both the state and federal and county, and I will say overall, in a former position, I was legislative assistant with the Oregon Catholic Conference, so working with the state legislature there. As you can imagine, a little less formal at the state level. Maybe a little formality is good. However, you know, I guess we have to pause for a second after yesterday's catastrophe, insurrection, realizing just how vulnerable our nation's capital is, and that vulnerability and being in an open society has both its ups and downs and certainly challenges, for sure. You don't want to underestimate or understate what happened yesterday. And normally I would be up on the Hill, but because of COVID, we're working from home. Another thing I'd say about this Advocacy 101 training is it's better done in person, but we will do the best we can here online. According to the Congressional Management Foundation, the most influential advocacy strategies for swaying an undecided member of Congress depend on personal communications from constituents. I cannot stress enough just how much important it is for you as a constituent and how much influence you have in going to see a member of Congress or their staff versus someone like me who, you know, is a paid lobbyist, is a paid advocate. Certainly, you know, there is influence for persons like myself working for one of the largest nonprofits, organizations and networks in the country. But a member of Congress and their staff are always going to be attentive to their constituents. They will note that you're coming from their district, and they will certainly want to prioritize those visits, whether they be virtual or in person. And under normal circumstances, those would be largely in person. Legislative visits build new relationships. These are some of the key takeaways I think that are important. They strengthen existing relationships. Your local perspective, as I mentioned, and stories are impactful. What is happening in your community? What is happening in your town? And certainly for a member of Congress or a senator, they're going to know what's happening in the state or particularly in the district. You know, a member is going to want to know, when I say a member, I mean usually a member of Congress or their staff. They want to know what's happening so that they can relate these issues to their congressional cohorts and help impact the development of policy. And earlier today in this presentation, we've heard about a few different bills that are out there that might be of interest to the network. But here we're going to talk a little more about taking those messages and those priorities and bringing them to a legislative body. Responding to constituents is a high priority for members and their staff. In-person visits from a constituent is likely to have more influence. But again, I would say in the time of the COVID pandemic, actually the virtual visits for me and my team have gone fairly well. And actually, and to some extent, some of the members of Congress have been a lot more available for visits virtually than in person. Legislative visits can add and should open up a dialogue. A member of Congress and their staff get to hear from you, from your perspective, about what's important in shaping public policy, particularly for impacts on environment and environmental stewardship, and how that impacts vulnerable people and communities, and from their perspective, their constituents. You can establish your relationship with these offices and their staff for future visits. So what do you need to do to go in? First, you want to do your homework. Prepare for your visit to get to know your elected officials. How do you do this? Through their websites. Go to their websites. You want to learn as much as you can about elected officials. What are their priorities? What are their backgrounds? What is their religious affiliation? For me, representing a Catholic organization in my day job, I'd like to know who are not the Catholic elected officials, whether that be incoming President-elect Biden to local senators of Virginia. So knowing about their background, where they've served, where they've done their Jesuit volunteer corps work, where what parish they might attend, what have you. What are their committee assignments? That's key. What assignments will they have will determine what policy they'll be able to affect, whether that's on budget appropriations or on policy issues. And budget and appropriations speak to funding issues, and policy issues speak to long-term, as you can imagine, policy direction. What are their stances on issues? What have they done in the past? What bills have they introduced? What are some of their priorities? What are some of the businesses in their districts? How will all of this put together a package of understanding who your elected official is? Look at their recent press releases. What have they been highlighting? What will be their priorities as we are now going into the 117th Congress? You want to check the media. Media is very key. Most elected officials are on Twitter and other social media. Of course, the current president has used that a lot, as we all know. But most members of Congress have a Twitter page. Their staff monitor that. They have Facebook pages. So there's a lot of opportunity through media to reach out and learn about who your elected officials are and what they're working on, what projects they're supporting, what are the issues important to them. They will use media to help get the word out of all the good work that they're doing. Preparing for your visit, get to know your elected officials through legislation they've supported. And here are some resources you can look to. Thomas, that's congress.gov, the Virginia General Assembly. You can look up exactly who is your elected official in Virginia, as well as follow legislation of the Virginia legislature and the General Assembly. Read the statements they've made in the congressional record, and there you'll find the link there to do that. There's an app you can use. I use sometimes Congress app it's on Android, and I do believe for Apple. Very helpful. It gives you a lot of this information at your fingertips. How to hold a successful meeting. And normally I would sit down with another person and go through this. The thing about meetings with staff and officials is they tend to be a lot less formal than you would imagine. They're usually you walk in and you sit down and, it's very friendly, and there's usually 1 to 3 staff if you're not meeting with the member of Congress themselves. And they're usually very helpful and knowledgeable and friendly, and are there to hear what you have to say. So you sit down and say, I'm Anthony Granado. I'm representing FACS today, and I just wanted to spend some time to chat with you about this, that, and the other, or this legislation is important to us. So, thank the staff member for their time. Share that you're a constituent. That's very key. That you're coming as a member of the community, particularly if it's a representative in the district of that representative, or if the senator that you are from the state of Virginia. Normally, you would go to the room and give each person a brief time to introduce themselves and who they represent. And this is often the case if you are going to meetings on the Hill with 1 or 2 or a group of people, and each of you would introduce yourselves. This is also done all virtually as well. Give a brief overview of what issues you will discuss. And then you're talking about the issues themselves. This is an opportunity to present the issues. Before the meeting, everyone should familiarize themselves with the issues. It's very key. You do not have to be a graduate level, top level expert on issues. You should have a sense of the issue, do as much research as you can, but the member of Congress and their staff do not expect you to be the authority on these issues. They want to know that the issues are important to you, and that it matters to the work of the member of Congress and their district. In the meeting, these selected to lead a person on these issues should take about 2 to 3 minutes each. That's, again, if you're in a group, to highlight the important parts of the issue, such as upcoming bills, personal stories relating to the issue. Anecdotal stories are key. What is happening in your neighborhood? What is happening in your town? What is happening in the state? Key reasons you stand up on the issue in particular. Why are you there? Why is it important to you? And why should the member of Congress and their staff listen to you in addition to you being a constituent? After you explain all the issues, take the time to ask the member of Congress or staff their position. You want to try to get their response. What knowledge do they have that they can share with you? They may often will say, well, I haven't taken a position on this yet, but they might give you some information and offer to follow up. I think that's also key to ensure that they know that you will follow up, hopefully finding out if the member of Congress has decided where they will land on a particular bill, an amendment, or what have you. Closing a meeting with a member. Again, on average, I would say meetings on the Hill can last anywhere from a 5-minute, very informal meeting in the hallway when there's no space left for a formal meeting in an office. I've literally taken dozens of meetings in a hallway with staff. They're writing notes down diligently. Those meetings can last everywhere from 5 minutes to you can have a meeting with a senator that lasts an hour. I actually had a meeting one time with Vice President Biden to talk about another issue that was supposed to last 20 minutes. And the incoming president is known to be a loquacious man. And what was supposed to be a 20-minute meeting lasted 2 hours, mostly of him sharing and talking with a few of us. And so you also find that will happen in Congress, that members will, sometimes, a meeting on average is about 15 to 25 minutes, but it may last longer, and take that opportunity. Definitely take that opportunity. But if you have another meeting scheduled after that meeting, make sure the staff knows that you have a back-to-back meeting and may need to leave at a specific time. So that's key. Reiterate the asks. It's good to have a leave behind document, whether it's a letter, whether it's information, data, stuff particularly relevant to the district or the state. Normally, this is a good time to request a photo. Again, this was done in person after the meeting. Definitely request a photo with the member of Congress or their staff. Something you can use on social media. And of course, too, the member of Congress will often share the photo themselves. They'll usually have staff there to commemorate the meeting and share the photo themselves. If the meeting is with a group, find time, even just a few minutes, to debrief right after the meeting. What did you hear? What commitments did you get? What did you learn? Where could you have improved? What is the potential follow-up with that office, with that member of Congress? So it's good to debrief right after that if you have the time. Write and compare notes if you're with a group. So you certainly can have the information is fresh in your mind. So for follow-up and next steps. And the meetings often get easier as groups feel more at ease. Again, it's sometimes people go into the meetings feeling that these are very formal, but you realize that they are pretty informal. Quick tips for success: be flexible. Like I said, I've had meetings in attics. I've had meetings in hallways. I've had meetings in cafeterias. So you got to be flexible. You're not always going to get a meeting in the grand office of the Speaker of the House. It's sometimes going to be in a very awkward place next to the, beverage dispenser. Stay on topic. That's another thing you want to try to do, and you can practice in advance. You want to stay away from rambling. You want to make sure that you're on topic. Collect business cards. That's very key to keep information and share that information back and forth if you have a business card or contact information. You don't be afraid to say, I don't know, or I do not have an answer to that question. Sometimes staff or the members say, can you tell me this? Do you have an answer for this? And if you don't have an answer, don't pretend. Don't try to guess. Say, I don't have that answer right now, but I can get you that information and I will follow up. I do that myself. I do not need to, pretend that I know something that I don't. So that's very key. And it also is an opportunity for you to be back in touch with that office. And remember to have one person who's going to be represent and also to provide a thank you note. You want to say thank you for the meeting and the opportunity. It's a moment of courtesy, and also helps in building relationship. And so they know that you're a friendly person and that there's someone that, you might hear from them and they might hear from you again in the future. So leaving that good gesture by saying thank you and seeking follow-up is very key. Advocacy is successful. And here are some of the highlights from FACS where advocacy has been successful. And I leave this with you here. FACS participated in the Community-Wide Energy and Climate Action Plan. FACS successfully called for a full funding of Fairfax County's Climate and Resiliency Plan launch. FACS advocated successfully with Fairfax County Public Schools to move the school board to begin the process of establishing net zero and carbon saving goals. FACS increased its General Assembly advocacy in 2020 through the Solar Freedom Act and a bill giving counties the option to tax single-use plastic bags. So local advocacy, whether advocacy at the local, county, or state, or in my case, the work that I do at the federal level, don't discount that you don't have an impact. You do. It's easy to dismiss your level of influence, but we have an open system of government in this country. Again, that has both positives and negatives, and it's your right as a citizen, a taxpayer, to voice your perspective. And so your advocacy will pay off. And here are some resources. Again, these slides will be provided to you. So all of this information, don't worry that, we'll be able to provide this. So this information will be very handy. You have, certain resources like GovTrack, contactingcongress.org, and then you have political media focuses. You don't necessarily have to pay for these. These are open source. There's a non-pay version of these, of The Hill, Politico, Roll Call, National Journal, etc. Will provide you on a daily basis, Washington Post, etc., New York Times, key information. And again, you don't want to go in, feeling, nervous. I know people are often nervous in their first visits, but they really are there to serve you, the constituent. You're the taxpayer. More often than not, most visits are not taking place with the member of Congress themselves. They're often actually with staff who at times can appear extremely young, but I assure you these are highly educated, well-informed, most of the time, persons who are there to represent their boss's interests and perspective. And here's just some key information for contact or Meg or the general information of FACS. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. And
thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. That was wonderful. I know that Anthony has to leave in about 5 minutes. He's off to, run another meeting. Does anybody have any questions for them? Oh, yes. Here's one from Ann Wood. Could you please address letter writing to the legislature?
So, yes, because of 9/11 and anthrax and all of that, snail mail is probably not the best way to go. So look up your member of Congress's email. There's certainly email that is available through their offices where you can more easily contact those offices. I've seen staff are also getting calls. There are paid services such as Voter Voice and others, which are very expensive. A lot of organizations use them, but definitely internet and social media are good ways to contact. You can write a letter electronically and send it that way in the body of an email. So don't underestimate that option.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Well, if not, I'm going to give another 10 seconds, Anthony, and then I guess I'm going to let you go.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm sorry I have to run, but appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Links to the presentations that we've seen today will be emailed to you. I can tell you that when elected officials hear that activists from Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions are calling, generally, they listen. So we hope you're motivated and inspired to get involved in advocacy this year. Please visit our website, sign up to receive our newsletters, join our advocacy teams. You can do that if you're not already a member by going to faithforclimate.org and clicking on join. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.